The Kennedy Center presents Up Close and Personal with Sheldon Harnick.
Those of you who've been here before know I always like to start at the beginning. So, Sheldon, I guess I want to ask you to talk a little bit about your growing up years, which I understand are in Chicago.
I'm from Chicago, and my parents, as the parents of many young Jewish kids at that day and age, expected me to be the next Yasha Heifetz. So I started studying violin at the age of 7. This was the Depression. My lessons cost $1 a piece, and that's all they were worth, believe me. So, at any rate, when I was in high school, I was writing doggerel and having it published in the school paper. For the most part, it was attempts at humorous verse. And friends of mine introduced me to a young man who was a year ahead of me, who was interested in the theater. And he wanted to write. So we got together and we began to write song parodies, sketch parodies, more serious things. We even entertained a bit in school. So that was my introduction kind of to theater. That and the fact that as a violinist, I was a very good sight reader. And in Chicago, this was in the 30s, there were Gilbert and Sullivan productions that took place at various venues where they couldn't afford an orchestra. And they needed young violinists, they needed orchestral members who would work for free. And those of us, they went to the high schools, they went to any source they could and said, can you recommend somebody who's a good sight reader? I got recommended, and I thought this will be interesting. So I played for a couple of Gilbert and Sullivan productions. And while sitting in the pit, every once in a while, the orchestra would be asked just to be silent while they rehearsed something. And I was fascinated with, I must say, as a young person, it almost figures that the thing that would intrigue me the most were the patter songs, the verbal agility and acrobatics. That fascinated me. And little by little, I got to like the other aspects of the lyric writing too, including the poetry. So that was kind of my introduction to musical theater, and it took.
Because college was quite important in your career.
Yeah.
After the Army, you go to college.
I did go, yeah. I went to Northwestern. I went for 2 reasons. One, it had the violin teacher that I wanted to study with. And also, it had a very elegant student review, the so-called WAMU show, which was short for the Women's Athletic Association and the Men's Union. In primordial times, the Women's Athletic Association had done a show, the Men's Union had done a show, and then one year a man put them both together and it became the WAMU show. I wrote for it the 3.5 years that I was there, contributing more songs each time. And the last year I was there, a local disc jockey who was about to go to New York for his own program, a man named Dave Garraway, he came to, and I was a huge fan of his, he came to the show and we all lined up after the show to meet him, and he told me he liked my work, and I said, is there any possibility that you could use somebody like me on your staff? And he said, well, we're going to New York, all our money is coming from New York, and if you have any dreams of being in the entertainment world, that's where I would go if I were you. So that was very influential. The other huge influence while I was at school, I had a classmate who later had a lovely career in television under the name Charlotte Ray. And Charlotte, this was around 1947, 48, I've forgotten exactly when, she had gone to New York on the Christmas holiday. And when she came back and we met, she had an LP and she said, Sheldon, you have to hear this, you especially. And she loaned me the album of Finian's Rainbow. So I listened to it and I was just dazzled. The music was beautiful, but it was the lyrics. It was what Yip Harburg was doing with those lyrics, which were playful and funny, inventive, but to me, they were saying things that I thought were important and needed to be said. And they were said in such an entertaining way that I thought even if you disagreed with what he was saying, you had to listen. And it was the first time that I had thought, that's a career I would like to try to follow.
When you were writing the Ramos shows, were you only writing lyrics? Did you have a partner? Was there someone?
No, at that time I was writing both music and lyrics. And when I came to New York, obviously my idol was Yip Harburg. Charlotte was working at the Village Vanguard, and through a friend of hers, she invited Yip down to see her act. So he came down, and she was using a song of mine, which he liked a lot. That was very helpful. And he invited me to come over and play for him. So I'm not a pianist, but I got a piano player. I went over. Most of what I played for him was my college stuff, which he realized. But he was wonderfully kind, and he gave me some terrific advice. One piece of advice he gave me, what I tended to do when I was writing songs was to write an introduction that was more or less a recitative, and then save the lovely melody for the chorus. And as Yip said, especially with a comedy song, he said, the first time people hear it, they will laugh, assuming it's funny. The second time, they know the jokes. So the second time, what has to keep them interested is not only the cleverness of the lyric, but the beauty of the music. So he said, make every part of that song as beautiful as you can. That's what will give it life. And the other thing he told me, he said that in his opinion, there were more qualified, more competent theater composers than there were theater lyricists, so that I could facilitate my career by working with other people besides myself. And that was a piece of advice I took very seriously.
Well, the next year, 1956, is very important because you meet a composer, Jerry Bock.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you met him.
Jerry had just split up with his lyricist, Larry Holofcener. Why that happened, I've never been clear, but he was looking for a lyricist, and I was introduced to him by our mutual publisher, a man named Tommy Volando. And this is kind of miraculous. A team, a composer and a lyricist who have never written together do not get invited to do a Broadway show. But we did. Through our publisher, Tommy Volando, suddenly Jerry and I were invited to do a show that it wound up being called The Body Beautiful. It was a financial disaster, or whatever that term is. It was a pluff, which is flop spelled backwards. But even though it was a flop, it was very important because opening night, Harold Prince and his then partner, Bobby Griffith, were in the audience. And they spoke, there was a cast party after, and Hal and Bobby were there. They introduced themselves to us, and they told Jerry Bock and me that they really liked our score. They told us they had problems with the show, but they liked our score, and they meant it, because a year later, after I had practically thought, what am I going to do? I've had my shot, and I blew it. They were working on a show called Fiorello about the mayor of New York, and they invited Jerry Bock to be the composer, and ultimately, I was invited to be the lyricist for that show.
What was it about your work with Jerry that you felt a compatibility with him? Was it instant? I mean, how did you?
It was instant. I loved his music. We had the same sense of humor. We found that politically we're on the same page. In almost every way, we just felt that we were, at that time, soulmates. It was great fun to work with him. And he's a very witty, very funny person, and also a wonderful editor of lyrics. So it was great working with him. And The Body Beautiful had been a flop, but he told me he would keep me informed of what was happening with Fiorello, which he did. Eventually, Hal Prince and his partner gave me the opportunity to write with Jerry 4 songs for the show on speculation. They had invited, I think, 3 or 4 young teams to write. And this was partly the influence of George Abbott, the director, who loved to work with young people. So Jerry and I wrote our 4 songs, and we were the team that was picked.
How do you work with Jerry? Does he write music first, lyrics first?
That's a good question, because working with Jerry was something I've never done with anyone else. Jerry would go into his studio. We would both know what the source material was. And Jerry would write songs, numbers. And when he had them to the point where he thought, okay, I don't need to work on this anymore, he would record them. And then he would send me a tape with anywhere from 8 to 12, 15 numbers on it, and I would listen. And invariably, there was something on the tape that I found so exciting and possibly jibed with an idea that I had for a lyric, so it was the way we got started. But getting those tapes was very exciting because it was a world premiere. I was the first one to hear these things. Then eventually, what we discovered, so that it always started with music first, eventually I would have an idea for a song where I knew that I didn't want to be constrained by music. I wanted the freedom to write the lyric first, and I made the wonderful discovery that Jerry Bock was as adept at setting lyrics as he was at writing music first.
Well, I think now is a good time to start with a little music, a little Jerry Bock, Sheldon Harnick. And we want to present 2 songs for you from Fiorello. The very first song is called Marry the Very Next Man. Before I introduce the singer, I want to introduce the gentleman who's our musical director for the evening. He's one of the top musical directors in the industry. He's actually a composer in his own right. And he just finished conducting the Broadway production of Gypsy with Patti LuPone. So you know he's the best there is. Please welcome Joseph Thalken. And to sing Marry the Very Next Man, we have one of Broadway's great leading ladies. She was the original star of Mamma Mia. She was standby for Glenn Close in Sunset Boulevard, and she went on about 100 times, and anyone who was lucky enough to see her perform as Norma Desmond knows that she was the great Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard. She's also one of cabaret's finest and most elegant of performers. Please welcome Karen Mason.
I shall marry the very next man who asks me. You'll see, next time I feel that a man's about to kneel, he won't have to plead or implore. I'll say yes before his knee hits the floor. No more waiting around, no more browsing through true romance. I've seen the light, so while there's a chance, I'm gonna marry the very next man who asked me start rehearsing the choir, tie some shoes on my Chevrolet, pelt me with rice and catch my bouquet. I'm gonna marry the very next man. If he adores me, what does it matter if he bores me? If I allow the man to carry me off, no more will people try to marry me off. No more living alone, no more cheating at solitaire, holding my breath for one special man. Why, I could smother for all he'd care. I'm through being wary, I'll marry the very next man. No more daydreams for me. Find the finest of bridal suites, chill the champagne and warm up the sheets. I'm gonna marry the very next man. When he proposes, I'll have him send me tons of roses, sweet scented blossoms I'll enjoy by the hour. Why should I wait around for one little flower? New York papers, take note. Here's a statement that you can quote. Waiting for ships that never come in, a girl is likely to miss the boat. I'm through being wary, I'll marry the very next man.
We should also say that that score earned Sheldon the first of many, many awards, the Tony Award for Best Score and the Pulitzer Prize. Exactly, yes.
And the Pulitzer Prize at that time came along with I think it was a $500 paycheck. And George Abbott suggested that we all give our checks to our favorite charity. And I said, not me, boy. I've been broke too long. I'm holding on to this.
The one composer that I really wanted you to talk about, because of course you got to work with a true legend, Richard Rodgers. The musical was called Rex. Talk a little bit about that. How did that assignment come up?
Well, when I worked with Dick Rodgers, I was very nervous because of his reputation. Not his reputation, his accomplishments. But we were doing this show about Henry VIII, and just before we were supposed to go into rehearsal, our producer, who was a songwriter named Richard Adler, called me and he said, the show may be off. Richard Rodgers has just been taken to the hospital to have his larynx removed. He has laryngeal cancer. And I thought, oh my God, it's off. But the operation was successful, and immediately Rodgers went to school to learn laryngeal speech, which is not easy, and he mastered that. And in fact, he called me one night, and I picked up the phone, and he said, oh, Sheldon, this is Dick. And I almost wept. I said, Mr. Rodgers, I said, I can understand every word. And he said, this is nothing. I just spoke to Dorothy, and she's in California. So he had a wonderful sense of humor. He was also, by the time I met him, he'd had a stroke, he'd had a heart attack. This was his second cancer. He'd had cancer of the jaw. And yet, whatever happened, he just kept going. And after the laryngeal cancer, he looked awful. But as soon as we began to work, he began to be rejuvenated. Music was his life, and you could see it. It was a great privilege to work.
I think it's a beautiful score, and I wanted you to hear one of the great love songs from that show. Tonight it'll be done as a duet, and two people I need to introduce. The gentleman, he's leading man on Broadway, starred in Chicago, Showboat, The Merry Widow for the New York City Opera. He travels around the country doing an evening with Jerry Herman. Many of you will know him as the leading man of the longest-running daytime soap, The Guiding Light. And accompanying him is another great Broadway talent. She's appeared on Broadway in The Full Monty, Thoroughly Modern Millie, Wonderful Town. And just a few weeks ago, she won extraordinary reviews, the leading lady in the Encore's production of Finian's Rainbow. And the wonderful news is it's going to open on Broadway in September or October, so don't miss her. Please welcome Ron Raines and Kate Baldwin.
However narrow the distance between us, it's still far too wide. I begrudge every task that takes me from you, and every moment that keeps me from your side. Away from you, there is no music, there is no sunlight, the world is gray. Away from you, the clocks are frozen, and time's a traveler who's lost his way. The people I meet might as well be statues. The words we exchange might as well be Greek. The room that I'm in may be bright and cheerful, but to me it's dim and bleak. I'm I'm half alive until the moment the door swings open and you walk through. Then my world starts to glow like a stained glass window, and what was old and cold is warm and new. And so you see why I can never be away from you.
Away from you, the world is lifeless, as though creation had gone awry. The trees are bare, there are no flowers, the fields are thirsty, the streams are dry. We live, you and I, for an hour of sunlight, so brief an escape from a world of gray. Our moments of warmth have been touch and go, love, but tonight we'll touch and stay. I'm half alive until the moment the door swings open and you walk through.
Now my soul is afloat on a wave of music that I could feel such joy I never knew. And
So you see
why I can never be away from you.
Oh, I hope Dick heard that.
Well, we can't be at the Kennedy Center and talk about opera without talking about a commission that you see from the Washington National Opera. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I just wanted to say that two of the most satisfying experiences I've had in the last few years have both been here. One was the Theater for Young Audiences did the Phantom Tollbooth that I did a libretto for, working with the author of that wonderful book, and Norton Juster, and a composer named Arnold Black. They did a wonderful production. I have to thank Daryl Ayers and Kim Peter Kovac for that. It was just wonderful, and it's on tour now. So that was a great experience. The other one, Marvin Hamlish called and said he'd been asked to provide a 10 or 15-minute spoof opera for the 50th anniversary of the Washington National Opera. And that sounded like great fun. And it was to feature Placido Domingo and Kristen Chenoweth. So we did that. And it was, I must say, it was wonderful fun working with Marvin. It was wonderful fun working with Placido and with Kristen and with the opera company. And Marvin had a good idea. He said, you know, this is a spoof, but here we've got Placido Domingo and Kristen Chenoweth. We've got these wonderful singers. Why don't we end this spoof with a real song? I said, what a good idea. And I said, I just happen to have a title I've always wanted to do a lyric for, called True Love and Beautiful Music, which fit the end of our particular spoof opera. So we wrote it.
And we have our own Placido Domingo. We're thrilled Placido could not be here tonight because we have Ron Raines.
If I may, let me offer you a song. This is my credo. May it sustain you your whole life long. True love and beautiful music are glimpses of magic I've longed before. Two gifts I've come to rely on, twin carpets to fly on that let me soar. And best of all, when everything in life is overwhelming and out of control, true love and beautiful music, by working their magic, unlock the feelings that always light up and lift up my heart and soul. And best of all, when everything in life is overwhelming and out of control, true love and beautiful music, by working their magic, unlock the feelings that always light up and lift up my heart and soul.
Placido and him.
Back to Bach. We left off Sheldon and Jerry get a Pulitzer Prize and a Tony Award for Fiorello in '59. We don't have time to go into detail, obviously, with all his musicals. The next show, 1960, Tenderloin, which a couple of years back had a great concert version done at Encore's. Terrific production, and was recorded, so it's a good copy to get. We're going to skip his next musical, She Loves Me. We'll come back to that. And we're going to jump to 1964 with a landmark musical, Fiddler on the Roof. Whose idea was it?
A friend, I can't remember who it was, sent me a novel called Wandering Star by Sholem Aleichem. I read it. Excuse me. I loved it, and I gave it to Jerry Bock, who loved it. And we gave it to Joe Stein. And Joe said, it's wonderful, but it's too big. It would require a cast of 70. It's an epic. But he said, since we love this man's work, let's see what else he wrote that we might be able to conceive of as a musical. And we found the Tevye's Daughter stories. What was an interesting sidelight is that we couldn't find, it was hard to find copies of Tevye's Daughters for all three of us. And Joe Stein finally located them in O'Malley's bookstore. But it's the only show, up until recently, it was the only show that I had started to work on without a producer. It was just Jerry Bock and Joe Stein and I, and
Joe being the book writer.
Joe Stein being the book writer, and we just plunged into it.
Clearly. But there's a story I want you to talk about, because I work with a lot of young musical theater writers and helping them develop musicals. And we often talk about opening numbers and how important they are and how they can, set the stage and set the style of the show. And clearly they're very, very important. And we often use in Fiddler a story about what happened with the great song tradition.
Well, our director was brilliant, Jerry Robbins, and Jerry knew that once you go into rehearsal, and it seems like the next day you open. So that 6 months before we went into rehearsal, we started to have regular meetings where he would ask us questions about things that he wanted to make sure he understood about the show, or things that bothered him about the show. And the main thing was, what is this show about? And we kept saying, it's about this dairyman who has these 3 elder marriageable daughters. And he'd say, no, that's the plot. That's not what gives these stories their power. What is that? And at one of the meetings, one of us said, hey, you know what this show is about? It's about the changing, the disintegration of a whole way of life. And when Jerry Robbins heard that, his eyes lit up and he said, that's it. He said, okay, it's the changing of traditions. In that case, then we should have a number at the beginning of the show which shows some of these traditions. And remember his words, he said, and that will be a tapestry against which the rest of the show plays.
And that song was put in when it was in Detroit, or was it on the road, or?
We wrote it in New York, but it didn't get staged till shortly before we left town for the tryout. Robbins called the whole cast together. He had Jerry Bock and Joe Stein there and me there. And it was like watching a great sculptor work with all this material. He put together the opening tradition in about 2 hours. And it was just a remarkable thing to watch him.
Well, there can't be a person alive who doesn't know the score from Fiddler on the Roof. And we asked Karen to put 2 songs together for you. So please welcome back Karen Mason.
How can I hope to make you understand why I do what I do, why I must travel to a distant land, far from the home I love. Once I was happily content to be as I was, where I was, close to the people who are close to me, here in the home I love. Who could see that a man would come who would change the shape of my dreams? Helpless now I stand with him, watching older dreams grow dim. Oh, what a melancholy choice this is, wanting home, wanting him, closing my heart to every hope but his, leaving the home I love. There where my heart has settled long ago, I must go, I must go. Who could imagine I'd be wandering so far from the home I love? Yet there with my love I'm home. That song obviously means a lot to me. I think it makes me cry every time. This next song is one of my favorites. I have always loved this song, and it has always spoken to my heart, and so much so that even though it's sung by a gentleman in the show, I decided to co-opt it and put it, well, it's a 30-year-old arrangement, but I put it on my last CD. Thank you for such a gorgeous song. I myself that I had everything, but that was only half true. I had an aim in life, and that was everything, but now I even have you. I have something that I would live for, someone that I can die for too. Yes, now I have everything, not only everything, I have a little bit more. Besides having everything, I know what everything's for. You used to wonder, could there be a wife to share such a difficult, wandering kind of life? I was only out of sight, waiting right here. Who knows tomorrow where our home will be? I'll be with you, and that's home enough for me. Everything is right at hand, simple and clear. I have something that I would die for, someone that I can live for too. Yes, now I have everything. Not only everything, I have a little bit more. Besides having everything, I know what everything's for.
You know, I think that's a perfect example. I mean, obviously you need talent like Karen, but the depth of your lyrics are so substantial that here you write 2 songs for specific characters in a book musical, and yet they can be extracted and have a completely new interpretation.
And she could sing a duet all by herself.
After Fiddler, Sheldon would go on to write a musical called The Apple Tree, which was really 3 one-act musicals directed by Mike Nichols. And then in 1970, The Rothschilds, starring Hal Linden, who I believe won a Tony Award for his performance in that show. But I want to go back to 1963 because I kind of wanted to talk a little bit in depth about She Loves Me, because I think it's one of the great scores ever. Yes, exactly. And talk a little bit about the plot, because it's a story that's been used a lot in film, often, as a matter of fact.
When the producer on that, Al Kasha, told Jerry Bock and me that he wanted to do a show based on The Shop Around the Corner, we knew the film and loved it. We thought, what a terrific invitation. And the book was to be done by a writer named Joe Masteroff, and both Jerry and I had seen a play that Joe had written, which we liked. So we started, and then came the problem of choosing a director. And we chose Gower Champion. And Gower said, unfortunately, he had a commitment. He couldn't do it. So at that point, Jerry and I suggested Hal Prince. We knew that Hal wanted to direct. We had seen some of the things he directed. Everybody knew him as a producer. Nobody knew that he was a very gifted director. And Hal said yes, he would. And about 2 days after Hal accepted, Kasha called and said he got a call from Gower Champion. His conflict had cleared up. He could now direct the show. And we thought, no, we've offered it to Hal. It would be wrong to take it away from him. And we're so glad that he stayed with it, because he did an absolutely wonderful job. And we had Barbara Cook and Barbara Baxley, and just a superb, it was a wonderful show.
Well, we have great songs from that score. First up, please welcome back Kate Baldwin.
Will he like me when we meet? Will the shy and quiet girl he's going to see be the girl that he's imagined me to be? Will he like me? Will he like the girl he sees? If he doesn't, will he know enough to know that there's more to me than I may always show? Will he like me? Will he know that there's a world of love waiting to warm him? How I'm hoping that his eyes and ears won't misinform him. Will he like me? Who can say? How I wish that we could meet another day. It's absurd for me to carry on this way. I'll try not to. Will he like me? He's just got to. When I am in my room alone and I write, thoughts come easily, words come fluently then. That's how it is when I'm alone. But tonight, there's no hiding behind my paper and pen. Will he know that there's a world of love waiting to warm him? How I'm hoping that his eyes and ears won't misinform him. Will he like me? I don't know. All I know is that I'm tempted not to go. It's insanity for me to worry so. I'll try not to. Will he like me? He's just got to. Will he like me? Will he like me?
Oh, I wish we could do the entire score. I don't think the song needs any kind of setup, do you?
I used to think all songs needed to be set up, especially the complicated ones. And I talked to Steve Sondheim about this once, and Steve said no. He said even if an audience hasn't seen the show, and even if it's a complicated song, they will invent their own context for it, which I hope is true.
Therefore, please welcome back Kate Baldwin.
I met Sheldon about 2 months ago at a concert at the 92nd Street Y, and then I've seen him once a month since, pretty much. And even though he couldn't make it to our production of She Loves Me, I'm so happy to be here singing the songs for him tonight. And they're the kind of songs that I'm going to sing forever and ever, so that people who are unfamiliar with the show can invent all they'd like. Thank you. Dear friend, I am so sorry about last night. It was a nightmare in every way. But together, you and I will laugh at last night someday. Ice cream, he brought me ice cream, vanilla ice cream. Imagine that, ice cream. And for the first time we were together without a spat. Friendly, he was so friendly, that isn't like him. I'm simply stunned. Will wonders never cease? Will wonders never cease? It's been a most peculiar day. Will wonders never cease? Will wonders never cease? Oh, where was I? I am so sorry about last night. It was a nightmare in every way, but together you and I will laugh at last night someday. I sat there waiting in that cafe and never guessing that you were fat. That you were near, you were outside looking bald. Oh no, my goodness. Dear friend, I am so sorry about last night. Last night, I was so nasty. Well, he deserved it, but even so, that George is not like this George. This is a new George that I don't know. Somehow it all reminds me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For right before my eyes, a man that I despise has turned into a man I like. It's almost like a dream, and strange as it may seem, he came to offer me
Well, it's hard to believe we've come to nearly the end of the evening. Please help me thank the maestro at the piano when they put the lights up. Joe Thalken. Sheldon, you've clearly set the example for others. You've set the bar really high with the highest of standards for a generation of theater writers who've come after you, literally an A to Z list, and I know firsthand, literally A to Z, Lynn Ahrens to David Zippel, all of those young writers adore you, admire you, and are in total awe and have learned a lot from you. And not only have you gained the respect of those contemporary songwriters, but you certainly have had it and continue to have the respect of your peers. And one of your peers, when he heard that we were going to do this evening, sent me a letter, and I thought I would read it. And it's for you, Sheldon. And you'll forgive me because I don't want to miss a word. I call Sheldon Harnick the inevitable lyricist. Never an unnecessary syllable, always a perfect rhyme, often a surprising choice, but every word inevitable. From the tilted wit of Boston Begin, which we didn't hear tonight, but I'm quoting, he wants you to hear, "We went to the Casbah, that's an Irish bar there, the underground hideout of the DAR there." To Sheldon's elegant simplicity of sunrise, sunset, swiftly flow the days. in which in that same score, Golden muses, I don't remember growing older, when did they? To Amalia and She Loves Me, after hours of waiting at a little table for a date who hasn't arrived, she sings, charming, romantic, the perfect cafe. Then, as if it isn't bad enough, a violin starts to play, and her disappointment becomes palatable. You see what I mean? Every word so expertly chosen, it becomes inevitable. I could go on, but I'd only be keeping you from sharing quality time with the man I so admire, the brilliant Sheldon Harnick, and that's from Jerry Herman.
Oh, my goodness. Oh. 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 Thank you. That was very moving. And before this is over, I want to thank you for supplying these three superb singers. Thank you.
My pleasure, their pleasure as well, that's for sure. And I'm certain I speak for the audience tonight when I say that we thank you for the gifts, the musical treasures you've given us. They will last a lifetime, several lifetimes. So please help me thank Sheldon Harnick.
For my next number.
Well,
Thank you. That also was very moving.
Well, just as Maya Rothschild, the lead character in the Rothschilds, paved the way for his sons in his lifetime, clearly Sheldon has done that for the generation of theater composers and lyricists that follow him. And that's a song cue if ever there was one. We want to close with the 11 o'clock number from the Rothschilds.
I have to set that up.
Oh, that you do.
I have to set it I have to set it up only because it is funny. When we tried out in Detroit, my Rothschild was Hal Linden, who later won a Tony for his performance. And it was very clear that the audience adored him. But what we were doing was being true to history, and early in the second act, Meyer died in the year in which he actually died. And in Detroit, we saw the air go out of the show once Hal Linden was off stage. So we thought, history be damned. Let's keep him alive till the end of the show. And let's give him a song to die on. And that's what we did.
Well, it's a great song. Please welcome back Ron Raines.
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you. On behalf of all the singers tonight, we want to thank you for the extraordinary gift that you've given all of us. The gift of your lyrics. And I love singing this next song. In my own lifetime, I want to see the fighting cease. In my own lifetime, I want to see my sons enjoy the fruits of peace. While I'm still here, I want to know, beyond a doubt, that no one can lock us in or lock us out. We have climbed higher, much higher than I thought we'd climb. It's a long journey, and even though the end's in sight, there's not much time. I want to know we haven't built on sand. In my own lifetime. In my own lifetime, I want to see our efforts blessed. In my own lifetime, I want to see the walls come down, and then I'll rest.